listening to A Transformed Life with Tiffani Cappello, a podcast for those who are tired of living defeated lives and are ready to rise up, conquer their fears, and create a positive future. A Transformed Life is about total life mastery, transforming your mind, health, and relationships. It's time to empower your mindset, optimize your health, and rock your relationships. Now, here is your host, transformational coach, hypnotherapist, certified nutritional consultant, and fitness trainer, Tiffani Cappello.
Okay, welcome to A Transformed Life podcast. I'm really excited today because today I have with me Daniel Root. Now, Daniel is a leading expert practitioner and trainer of Detoxination. So he is the son of the world-renowned expert in human detoxification of heavy metals, synthetic or man-made chemicals, and radiation exposures, Dr. David E. Root. Now, Dan and his father authored Sauna Detoxification using niacin, following the recommended protocol of Dr. David E. Root that sells thousands of copies worldwide. So he was the co-host of a weekly radio program called The Get Detoxinated Show on KSAC 105.5 FM. Dan is the CEO of Detoxination Wellness Centers. So he has been an entrepreneur in the information technology field since 1989 and is the adoptive father of 3 biological sisters. So Dan served on the board of Sierra Adoption Services for 6 years, and he lives with his wife, Susie, and their youngest daughter in Sacramento, California. So welcome. How are you today, Dan?
I'm great, Tiffani. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, welcome. And let's tell people what's the first thing you want to tell them about you and how you got into detoxification.
Wow, I could go back for years on this one, but I'll tell you the short story is that I'm a product of the Midwest in the late 70s, early 80s. And my personal background is that I was basically addicted to drugs, especially cocaine. And my father, Dr. David Root, had been working with a detoxification method that uses niacin, exercise, and sauna. And when I moved from Ohio out to California, I was basically volunteered to go through the detox program. Now, I got to tell you that the story of my father needs to be brought up too, because he was in the Air Force for 20 years, and he was a flight surgeon as well as a flying physician, a research pilot, in other words. And he's published over 6 papers regarding occupational, well, I guess you can call it the biological and chemical defense systems. So he was basically already very well known for that kind of work. So when he retired from the Air Force and opened up his practice in Sacramento, he was basically focused on people who are exposed to heavy metals, chemicals that are man-made, like synthetic chemicals, as well as radiation poisoning. So he was, working with these folks that were injured at the workplace. And unfortunately, the medical literature has nothing to help with chemical exposures or radiation. Of course, there's chelation for heavy metals, but nothing really for chemicals. So he was basically kind of in the dark at that point. But he happened to be approached by a group of, believe it or not, Scientologists who were bringing L. Ron Hubbard's Purification Rundown to the public without the stigma of Scientology. And he started sending patients to their sauna detox program that uses niacin and was getting great results. So he started to send more patients and realized that he needed to incorporate that into his practice. So essentially, because the Scientology version of this was really geared towards drug addiction rehab, the Scientologists knew I was doing drugs, and they basically needed to hire me because of my background in computers, and they needed a billing system and a practice management system. So I wound up going to work for them, and part of the terms of my employment were to be volunteered to go through this program. And I got to tell you, I went through it kicking and screaming. I literally felt like this was a complete waste of time. This Scientology, for crying out loud. And so I was probably their worst patient. But at the end, I went 33 days. It should have been maybe a 21 to 30 day program for the average person. But for me, I went through 33 days and I hit what's called end phenomena, which is a wonderful place to be. It's where you've got this overall sense of well-being. You've got high energy, stamina, performance, your senses like your vision, your like color vision, your sense of smell, sense of taste, are all more vivid, and also your dreams are more vivid and you remember them better. So by the way, the brain fog lifts, and I didn't even know I had brain fog because I was always high. So when the brain fog lifted and my cognitive function improved by at least 10 points on the IQ scale, I'll tell you, it was a game changer, and I became their biggest advocate. So that's how I got involved.
So I don't think we realize, because we do, I mean, I think most Americans know that we're sort of swimming in a toxic soup right now. I mean, we are exposed to chemicals in the food we eat, in the air we breathe, the water we're drinking, the products we're putting on our bodies. And people are starting to become more and more aware of that. And so
very much so.
It's interesting to me that you described that brain fog is lifting and getting a mental clarity you didn't even know you had, because those toxins are stored in the body, and our regular day-to-day activities, our liver and kidney is not able to get those out. So that makes me really look forward to doing a detox, because I know I have brain fog, so I can't even imagine. But
that's wonderful.
Talk a little bit on the fact that we are so exposed to such a different array of chemicals. And I think that when people are looking at their chemical exposures and they begin to be self-aware about that, they tend to focus on individual chemicals, like there's this.
Well, heavy metals.
Yeah, heavy metals.
Everybody's focused on heavy metals.
Yeah, we've all heard what happened in the water supply up in Michigan, and kids were exposed to lead, and we know what happened there. And then people start to look at their shampoo and they look at an individualized chemical and they say, oh my gosh, this is a known carcinogen. And they look at their food and they see a certain food additive and they find out it has deleterious effects on health. But one thing people don't realize, I think, or they just don't think about that much, is that all of these chemicals can interact within the body. And no, there's no scientist out there that can study all of these individualized interactions and really know what's going to happen. So while the chemical may be at an EPA safe level, and we could talk more about that later and what my opinion and maybe yours is on that, but the just all those chemicals intermingling as the body is trying to deal with them can create problems that no scientist is going to be able to predict. So talk a little bit on, just the different kinds of chemicals that we're faced with and how that's having an effect on our health and well-being.
Yeah, so in fact, there's over 100,000 chemicals that are in commercial use today, and less than 10% of those have been actually tested for human safety. And out of those, less than 1% have been tested in combinations with one another. So you do get these chemical mixes going on that can be very toxic to the body. Now, we're seeing a lot of like BPA from plastics and phthalates from plastics as one of the main pollutants that people are getting, especially from bottled water. And in fact, if you like your alkaline water in plastic bottles, you're also adding antimony to the mix. So that's something most people don't realize, is that the alkaline water is drawing antimony out of the plastic bottles. Other things that we're seeing too, the chemtrail problem is real. And so we're seeing a lot of chemicals being dropped out of the sky, this aluminum oxide, barium oxide, strontium, and even several things that are like biological waste. But these things are absorbing through the skin, and we're inhaling them. And these are two of the worst ways to actually become toxic. By having inhalation or skin exposure. And the other things too, as you mentioned, the chemicals that are in the body products and things like that we put onto or into our bodies. Most people aren't really conscious of the fact that these chemicals that they can't even pronounce are probably going to wind up being stored in fat. And the fat stored toxins, what we call lipophilic xenobiotics, or fat attracted, fat soluble, heavy metals and man-made chemicals that are foreign to the body. These are really the kind of toxins that we're dealing with. In fact, if you looked up the definition of the word toxin, you'll find it's something to the effect of a venom or poison of plant or animal origin that in low concentration in the body can be harmful. Now, the other part of that definition is that synthetic or man-made substances are excluded from toxins. That's not what toxins are. So most people are using that word wrong. So I use the word lipophilic xenobiotics. However, it's easier to say toxins. So, but the thing is that we're getting these into our body, and most of them are fat soluble. And our livers have not adapted to these man-made chemicals. So they go through what's called enterohepatic recirculation, where they go around and round through the liver trying to be processed and broken down. And unfortunately, with many of these chemicals, they actually, when they get broken down by the liver, if they can be, they may become more toxic to the body. So it's really very harmful, and the body will store these toxins in fat somewhat to protect the organs. So these chemicals, once they get stored in fat, they basically are going to only be released under stress or when you're doing something like a HIIT workout. In fact, if you've ever done a strenuous workout and gotten headachy or nauseous, they tell you you've got a buildup of lactic acid, but in reality, you're also saturating your tissues, your joints, your brain, your gut with all of these toxins that have been liberated. So the fact that these toxins are not able to be broken down in the body, especially the persistent organic pollutants like your DDT or your dioxins, your pesticides like glyphosate, these are things that are definitely not designed to, or they're designed to not break down in the body. So they will cause a lot of damage over the course of many years. And the ideal scene then, of course, is to get those out of the body so that they don't cause any more damage.
I have a question. Could this be why some people have trouble losing weight? Does the body try to hold on to these toxins? Because to me, it would make sense that when you're losing weight, these toxins are being released, that the body is so wise, the mind is so wise. And as the mind is looking over the body and reading what's going on, that it might make the decision that we've got to stop the release of toxins at this rate, at least.
Yes, absolutely. So once these what are called lipophilic xenobiotics are in the fat, they actually start to do more than just cause uncontrollable weight issues. They also cause the mitochondria to be unable to produce ATP or adenosine triphosphate energy. So these toxins that are in the fat actually disrupt the enzymes and proteins required by mitochondria to produce the energy our bodies need. So when the fat is toxic, it can't participate very easily in that energy production cycle. So the fat becomes so stagnant that it attracts more lipids and more lipophilic xenobiotics. And that's what we have as stubborn weight. So yes, the problem is that when your body's toxic and you have weight control issues, it's because the toxins are preventing your body from using that fat.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And what do you think is the biggest chemical threat today? I mean, you mentioned dioxins, glyphosate. I mean, if you just had to pick the number one most dangerous chemical that people are exposed to.
It'd be mercury from your amalgam fillings, mercury from all kinds of exposures, but definitely that one is the most toxic material. And second to that would probably be the lead. And I want you to know, too, that lead stores in bone, especially the adipose marrow tissues. So just understand our protocol. When we talk a bit more about it, you'll understand that the program is able to actually get those toxins like the lead and the mercury out of the bones as well as the fat. There is another chemical, too, or metal that we're seeing a lot more damage, especially my Facebook group. I have a Facebook group. It's basically the same name as the book, Sauna Detoxification Using Niacin. And in that group, I have a poll question that asks people what brought them to the group. And it's a stunning reality that many people are there because of what are called iatrogenic conditions, or conditions caused by the medical therapy or the diagnostic. So one of the main things that I'm seeing is gadolinium toxicity from MRIs. So the contrast dye that the radiologists insist on injecting into people's bodies is retaining in the body and causing so many different types of diseases and conditions that it's actually creating a long-term patient after you've had a MRI for some kind of diagnostic, like for MS or brain injuries or anything like that. So the gadolinium toxicity is one of the fastest I think I've been seeing as far as things that are causing people issues.
Wow, how sad. You're going for an MRI to find out if something's wrong, and now something's definitely wrong. Okay, so I'm hearing a lot about detoxification now, more than ever. I think people are becoming more aware. But when when you start to look at something on the net, you're getting ads constantly for something. And so there's just a million detoxification products. In the last show, I did an interview with Dr. Tammy Gutierrez, who's a functional medicine professional. She talked a lot about detoxification, and she mentioned that how people decide they want to detoxify, and they just go and grab the first products they see. And sometimes what they're actually doing is liberating toxins into the body that are not being released because the elimination channels, the kidneys, the skin, the liver, are not functioning properly, and they make themselves sick, and they end up stopping and thinking, this isn't for me. So tell me what you recommend for really getting these chemicals out.
Yes, thank you. The thing that I'm seeing is that a lot of people think that herbs and things like cilantro or basically there's several different types of herbal remedies and things like that are going to do a thorough detox, and they really aren't. The fat stored toxins will only be liberated under a certain set of conditions. The first one, of course, we've already touched upon. That would be a workout or something that is more strenuous than normal. You're going to liberate some toxins, but the thing is that these toxins are not being released out of the body, so they're going to resequester somewhere else, and that's called redistribution. A program like ours, on the other hand, is designed to actually liberate toxins 3 times faster than normal. And then we're using sauna to sweat these toxins out and using binders to pick up what comes through the GI tract. So if I may, I'll just go ahead and explain this program because it's important for people to understand several concepts here. We've already touched on the fact that toxins is a word that is not necessarily meaning heavy metals or man-made chemicals. And that's important because I've seen too many debunking articles that say you can't sweat toxins out in a sauna using your sweat glands, which ironically, they are accurate, but they're also misleading. So the reason I say that is because we're dealing with lipophilic xenobiotics. These are fat-attracted or fat-soluble toxins. They don't come out of the watery eccrine sweat. They're hydrophobic, so they don't come out through normal sweat. What we need is the sauna to produce what's called sebaceous sweat. And what sebaceous sweat is the sebum from the sebaceous glands, which are attached to the hair follicles, and they keep the hair follicle lubricated so the hair can grow, and it keeps the hair and skin moist on the outside while protecting the body maybe from bacteria. I don't think it does a great job of anything else, but as far as protecting the body, but the sauna will heat up the sebaceous glands and cause sebaceous sweat. And since these are lipophilic toxins, they're going to be excreted through that mostly. And in fact, Dr. Dietrich Klinghart, who is the leading expert in environmental toxicity, has already demonstrated that the infrared saunas do a much better job than the dry saunas at producing sebaceous sweat, which has all these toxins and other materials coming out. I'd love to read you his quote, but I don't have it handy. I didn't think I'd be bringing that up today. But anyway, the way our protocol works is we use niacin to induce 2 separate conditions in the body. If you've ever had the flushing form of niacin, then you know that it actually causes this redness and an itchy, prickly feeling. So you get like red face, you get red arms, upper body type of redness. And what you're seeing there is the capillaries have vasodilated, so they've opened up and more red blood cells are able to flow through. And so you get this redness from all the red blood cells flowing through more. So the fact that that's happening actually pushes some of these bloodborne toxins out to the skin layers or the dermis layers so that the sebaceous glands can then excrete them through the sebaceous sweat. Now, the second condition that most people have never even heard of is a condition called rebound lipolysis. Now, this is a process where when somebody ingests niacin, it has this temporary effect of depressing the condition called lipolysis. So let's talk about what that means. When your body's producing ATP energy or adenosine triphosphate energy, it's breaking down the triglycerides in the fat into its components, which are 1 glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Now, the mitochondria use this material for producing ATP energy, but when when niacin is given to somebody, the lipolysis, which is what that's called, is actually depressed for about 3 hours. And it's the entire time that niacin is metabolizing. So once niacin wears off, then the body can resume its normal levels of lipolysis, but it invariably will overshoot, and we get what's called a rebound lipolysis effect. And it shoots up to about 4 times normal levels of free fatty acids in the system, in the blood, and that translates to about 3 times normal levels of toxins being liberated from fat. So this is the main way that we use niacin to get the body to start releasing toxins from fat, so that we can then use the sauna to sweat them out in the sebaceous sweat. There is an exercise component that's involved, and that's because we want to be able to start the sweating process by getting exercise happening. And also the exercise is going to pump more blood out to the dermis layers so that you're able to get these toxins where they need to be. So that's in a nutshell how the protocol works, but there's several other things that need to be considered. Things like you need to do electrolytes because we're doing extended periods of sauna. You need to replenish the vitamins and minerals that sweat out with the good stuff is sweating out with the bad stuff, in other words. And there's oils and lecithin, and there's a CalMag beverage and things like that. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, and everything has to be timed appropriately. So it's not a matter of just popping niacin and jumping into a sauna. If you do that, you'll wind up probably getting yourself in a worse condition of headache, nausea, flu-like symptoms, nausea, and all that. So I hope that explanation helps to get people to understand that this protocol actually has a lot of science behind it. And even though it was developed originally by the Scientologist or L. Ron Hubbard himself, just know that we have taken what they developed and putting science behind it, figured out what makes it work. And I got to tell you, there's been several changes that we've done. So it's no longer even the same type of protocol. What they do in about 4.5 to 5 hours, we've got down to 2 hours. And the addition of the binders is a huge addition. I know because I went through it in 1986 for 33 days with no binders. And every day after each session, I felt horrible. And the binders have made that problem go away. And it's also made the protocol more effective. But the other thing that I want to touch upon is the fact that the dry saunas that were always used with the Hubbard method also made the protocol take a lot longer, because the dry saunas are typically running at 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And a person can only stand to be in one of these saunas for about 15 to 20 minutes before they have to step out, and cool down for maybe 10 minutes or so. So you go through repeated cycles of heating and cooling, heating and cooling, heating and cooling, and eventually you get your core temperature up to the point where you can produce the sebaceous sweat. Now, far infrared saunas, we introduced to the protocol in 2014, and that made a huge difference. The infrared saunas heat you from the inside out. It's not like a microwave, but the infrared waves penetrate the skin about 1.5 inches deep, and they resonate with the water molecules in your cells, and that vibrational action creates the heat that warms up the body. And a person can stand to be in a far infrared sauna for extended periods of time, like 45 minutes. And it's at a lower temperature, and it's getting a lot more sebaceous sweat produced. So you're getting a much better detox now that we've introduced the infrared. Just know, though, that the dry saunas still work for the program, but it's much preferred to do it with the infrared.
Well, and who wants to spend 5 hours in a day going through a detox protocol and then, or spend 2 hours in a day. That's much more manageable for people.
Absolutely.
But typically, how long is someone going to need to do a sauna protocol to get detoxified, to get all these chemicals out? So, especially if they have a health concern.
Exactly. And in fact, I'm glad you brought that question up because, there's a lot of products we've already talked about that are available. And a lot of times people think that, they're going to be able to detox, rapidly with just a, slight amount of maybe discomfort, but is more convenient to do these products. Our protocol does require about 30 days for an individual to go through the first time. And I say that because we've done so many studies on this protocol that we found that in a 30-day program, the body burden of toxins is being reduced by about a third. So, for some people, that's all they need is one of these 30-day programs. But for most people, especially anybody who's ever had gadolinium from an MRI, we know that they're going to need to do the protocol 2 to 3 times, if not more, depends on how many, IVs of that gadolinium metal they put into the body. But the average time frame is about 30 days, and you would pause about 2 weeks or more between these programs, as we call them. So just know that we expect about a third of the body burn to be reduced in a 30-day program. So you might want to consider making this like a lifestyle change and do it throughout the year, maybe 3 times. But I do a 14-day version of the protocol today. In this day and age, I do about a 14-day version of it because I sit in my sauna for 30 minutes every day. It's the healthiest appliance you can own. And I can tell you, because I've had a sauna in my life since the 70s, that it is the healthiest appliance you can own. And in fact, I can't believe I am going to be 60 years old this year. I'm turning 60 and I feel like a healthy 39-year-old. And I have the energy, stamina, performance of, a healthy 39-year-old. My brain functions absolutely perfect for me. And I'll tell you, it's a game changer to sit in a sauna daily like I do. And I believe you have a sauna, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Well, I try. My goal is sauna 5 days a week because I became aware of the research showing that it took at least 5 days a week and a minimum of 20 minutes. Now, I do have access to a dry sauna during the week, and then on the weekends, I'm at my boyfriend's, and he has a lovely far infrared sauna. So, wonderful. Yeah, so I have became aware that you lower your risk of Alzheimer's and dementia by about 70% just by doing daily sauna. And I unfortunately have the ApoE4, also MTHFR. So it's been speculated that I don't detoxify as well. So to me, I felt like it's really not optional. But in reality, in the toxic soup that we all exist in, I'm beginning to feel like, really, is sauna optional for anyone now?
I personally believe everybody needs to do our protocol. Unfortunately, though, there are contraindications and preclusions that means that not everybody can. Examples would be, for example, if you're pregnant or lactating and breastfeeding, you do not do a protocol like this. Heart conditions that include pacemakers or defibrillators and things like that, you don't go into a sauna with those without your primary care practitioner's blessing. There's other things like hemophilia, but just know that there are some reasons why people cannot do this program. But I will tell you that when you mentioned the MTHFR gene variations, I'd love to touch on that for just a minute.
Oh, sure. Go right ahead.
Yes, the medical industrial complexes, I love to call them, have been using the Human Genome Project to identify genes that can cause certain conditions so that they can offer therapies for that. And the reality is that they don't want you to know that your body is not designed to break down man-made chemicals and that we're being polluted by them in a daily fashion. And so when it comes to MTHFR, it's not so much that your body is genetically predisposed to not being able to detox well. It's the fact that the body can't detox these, and nobody can detox these chemicals. So at least most of them. But I'll also say that with the MTHFR, there is a problem that can be, part of this whole bigger equation called methylation or under-methylation. And there's a lot of people who are concerned about a sauna detox program using niacin because of under-methylation. And if you are concerned about under-methylation, just know that we don't have a problem with that with this protocol. Some people, call niacin a methyl sponge. And the reason we don't have a problem with that is because we use lecithin in the protocol, which helps. Lecithin is actually a precursor to choline, and choline is a precursor to, choline is a methyl donor. The other thing I want you to know about this protocol is that choline and niacin both support the glutathione. So we're supporting the liver in the process of this. And in fact, we offload a lot of the detox functions from the liver and kidneys to the skin, because the skin is the largest detox organ of the body.
Now, the interesting thing is, too, I had the same feeling about MTHFR, because when I first started to research it, I would read some articles that say, well, MTHFR is not a defect. It's just a normal gene variation, and what it becomes problematic in our modern society. And when I was diagnosed with one allele, I guess I shouldn't use the word diagnosis, because having one allele of ApoE4, which I guess puts a person at about a 30% risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia, as opposed to having two alleles, which puts you at a 70% risk. Now, that's a significant risk, and it's very scary if someone hears these words. But I came across an interesting study, and I wish I could remember where it originated. But it was about tribes living along the Amazon, and also some tribes in Africa. And what they found out was there were tribes living in primitive conditions, not exposed to toxins. And nearly everyone in the tribe was carrying two ApoE4 gene variants, and they were not getting Alzheimer's and dementia.
Right.
And so first they thought, well, maybe, it could be a genetic thing. But interestingly, there was some tribes along the Amazon River, the tribes upriver, that were being exposed to industrial chemicals that were being pumped into the river coming off the factory, had high rates of Alzheimer's and dementia. Then you go way down the river into the tribes that were really not getting a lot of exposure, or none, because everything's filtered out by that time. No Alzheimer's and dementia. So it's really not about the gene. It's very multifactorial. It's about the gene interacting with the environment, right, that's causing a problem. And we really don't know what kind of gene interactions we are having. So it's just safer to get these chemicals out, right, and to avoid putting them in to begin with. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet if they were to test the waters up where the industrial, the factories were, or whatever they are, they would probably find high levels of aluminum and fluoride, because that's the biggest way that we know of for Alzheimer's to be developed in a person.
Now, speaking of environmental problems, you probably heard what just happened in East Palestine. And I think there were at least 5 or 6 really dangerous chemicals that were released into the environment during the train derailment. And then the decision was made that the best course of action would be to burn these off. Now, I don't know if that was a good or a bad decision. I'm not a toxicologist, but nevertheless, these citizens, I think there's about close to 1,500 people living in East Palestine, were exposed to a level of chemicals that's just astronomical. I don't think, from what I've heard, that there has been an environmental disaster where the citizens were exposed to that level. Similar chemicals, but not that level. And I have friends of friends. I don't know anyone directly in East Palestine, but a friend of mine has a really good friend down there who's now leaving, who's had burning eyes. She's had chemical bronchitis she was hospitalized for. People are experiencing headaches. Children are breaking out in rashes. There's just some extreme health issues. And this is just right now. This isn't the long-term effects, because as you said, these chemicals are storing in the body of these citizens. And some of them are choosing to stay for whatever reason. Maybe they don't have a choice. So talk a little bit on that and what you've noticed and what your recommendations are.
Yeah, specifically the vinyl chloride that they dumped into a trench and burned, and it was like 1.1 million gallons of this vinyl chloride, which is a precursor to the PVC pipes, polyvinyl chloride. That vinyl chloride was probably less toxic until they burned it, and the burning of that actually creates hydrochloric acid, and in fact, it goes even further than that. When that gets broken down in the environment with moisture, it turns into phosgene, which was a chemical warfare agent used in World War I. So the vinyl chloride was probably the worst of the contamination that they received out there. There was also butyl acrylate, and I'm looking at some notes here because the toxic chemicals. There was a lot of stuff that was actually released. But the really toxic ones are like the phosgene, which is being created by this vinyl chloride as it was burned off. There's benzene there, but apparently there was no breach of that. Let's see, I think I saw there's one other. Well, the polyethylene and the polypropylene were basically undamaged rail cars, but these folks had 1.1 million gallons, as opposed to what occurred in 2012 in Paulsboro, New Jersey, where they had about 180,000 gallons of vinyl chloride dumped. And so back in 2012, we've had 11 years or so, and the people who were at the New Jersey disaster, they're starting to really see the effects of that long-term exposure, and they're warning people in East Palestine that this is going to be a long-haul battle with the legal suits and the any kind of relief. So they're really suffering in New Jersey, and we're afraid that this is going to happen with East Palestine. The good news is that these kinds of toxicities can be detoxed with our protocol. So I hope if anybody is in that region and hears this podcast, that they reach out to me, because this program is absolutely the best thing they can do to keep themselves from coming down with anything in the future that was related to that exposure.
And yeah, and the great thing about sauna protocols is that you can find the data to back up what you're saying. So I know before I started the sauna, having that ApoE4 diagnosis, I'm like, oh boy, what can I do? No one wants to feel powerless. And there was so much research out there on sauna detoxification, but I did run into Ron Hubbard's protocol, and there was actually, some science behind it, but the affiliation with Scientology, kind of made me draw back. So it's good to know that people do not have to go to the Church of Scientology in order to have the experience of being able to detoxify using sauna. Now, one of the things I would like to know from you is what sort of health effects did the people experience now 11 years post that train disaster that happened in New Jersey?
Well, we're not even going to know for sure what the really long-term effects are. And my background with Paulsboro is not as strong as it is with the East Palestine. I have a lot. I graduated high school in Ohio, in Beaver Creek, Ohio. And so I have a huge affinity for Ohio, and anything that happens there, I'm very interested in. Now, the Paulsboro folks, I've seen some articles that they're talking about the long-term headache, nausea, and they basically are having symptoms that are related to these gases that the burning vinyl chloride created.
So still, even 11 years later, they're still having these symptoms. Okay.
Yes. And that shows that these chemicals are actually still in the body and affecting the folks. And the interesting thing, too, that you need to know is that technically this is a water-soluble chemical. But unfortunately, our cells are now so compromised, including the blood-brain barrier that is supposed to protect the brain. Everything's so compromised by the toxicity that we have today. So the fact that a water-soluble toxin is storing in the body is because the fat-soluble toxins have basically opened the door for them to be stored away as well. And because they are man-made chemicals and heavy metals that are being, introduced to our bodies, the liver is not going to process them properly, and they're not going to be handled through the natural detoxification pathways very well. Some do, but and most water-soluble toxins are able to be released from the body. But again, if they're man-made, they are less likely to be broken down by the livers. So I wish I could speak more.
That's a lot of chemical exposure all at once. Probably, I mean, some people are calling this like the worse than Chernobyl, and I don't know if that's the case. Maybe that's too dramatic. However, Chernobyl was mostly radiation, and here we have a massive amount of different chemicals all simultaneously being burned.
Absolutely.
But, one thing that concerns me is everyone's talking about East Palestine, and I actually attended virtually. I would love to have gone, but I wasn't going to set foot in East Palestine. I live in Ohio, so I'm very concerned about what's happened. And I wanted to go see Aaron Brockovich and go, but I figured this was a time for the citizens. I would attend virtually. And they recommended that anyone within 50-mile radius of East Palestine, and the guy was like, walk, don't run, and get your blood tested. And then they put up labs on the East Palestine Justice website that were showing people where they could get their blood tested to see if they had any dangerous level of toxins. And I would say the people in East Palestine just must. But after a while, these toxins are no longer detectable in blood. Now they're being stored in the tissue. So the person might think, I'm safe. And they're actually not safe because it's stored deep in the fat, and it can still cause problems in the mitochondria. Now, in your opinion, how broad, I mean, we don't really know, I guess, if we've not experienced anything like this before, but I live 77 miles from East Palestine. So it's not too far out of that 50-mile range, and it's not real comforting. Now, I haven't noticed anyone around here having any kind of symptoms. Like, I'm hearing people within 20 miles, I'm having some friends tell me, they've got ulcers in the mouth, burning eyes, headaches, things like that. I haven't had any issues. I haven't noticed them, but I've thought to myself, just because I'm not having any issues, doesn't mean there's not toxins being stored. So knowing what you know about East Palestine, how big of an impact is it going to have beyond that 50-mile radius?
Well, you consider the fact that the river, the Ohio River, was flowing right past all this. We don't know for sure if anything got in there, but when you dump a bunch of vinyl chloride into a pit, you've got to think that the groundwater is going to eventually get contaminated. We also do know that the farms and I think there's chicken farms, there's growers who are all going to have some kind of effect, and the food that's manufactured around there is going to wind up in all parts of the country. So we will probably see some of these effects many years down the road. But, it's really difficult for me to say. I'm not an expert in this area. But one thing I want to circle back to is the testing that you just described, because there's something that people should know, and that is the fact that things like urine tests and stool tests are really only going to show what the body's eliminating. It's not a good it's not a good body burden test to see what the actual levels are. And in fact, especially with the urine tests, what we find is that, people will do a urine test prior to one of our detox programs, and, they'll test at this level for a particular metal or chemical or what have you. And then when they're done with their protocol, they want to see it down here, but it winds up going way higher than it was before. And we look at that as a positive, because the reality is that once you've gone through a program like ours, your body is more able to handle toxins. and you start eliminating at a higher rate than normal. So when you go through our program, you'll see that the levels of elimination are higher even in the urine and feces. So this is important to recognize. The other thing too is the blood tests are only showing what's in the actual blood at that point. So as I mentioned, with normal everyday activity, the normal lipolysis action is releasing some toxins. And so you get these toxins into the blood and you're only going to measure what was there at that time. And it's also not able to be used as a body burden value. The only way we were able to do studies was through fat biopsies. And that's a very expensive proposition if you don't know what you're looking for. One of the studies that my father did was so important that it actually has been cited in over 25 other papers, and it was also used in an allergy medical textbook. This study was done on a group of capacitor workers in Semic, Slovenia. And the capacitor workers are exposed to PCBs. That's a main oil in the capacitors. And there was a woman that was the real reason why the folks that ran that capacitor plant contacted our team, was because she was apparently in bed for 20 hours a day and pretty useless for the remaining 4. And her breasts were oozing about 50 cc's of a blue-green material. And her job at the plant was to test these capacitors as they came off the conveyor belt. And so she, using her bare hands, would pick up the capacitor, and if it was leaking PCB oils, it would go into the bad bin. If it wasn't, it would go into the good bin. And the hands and feet don't have any protective sebaceous glands, so there's no hair, right? So the hands and feet absorb the toxins faster than any other part of the body. So she was basically absorbing all this PCB into her system, and that was what the blue-green material was, by the way. But they were actually using 6-inch biopsy needles to shove into the rumps of these 16 capacitor workers, and they would take the before and after samples. They were also doing blood tests at the same time. And what they found was that the fat biopsies were showing a 200 times greater value of PCBs over the blood tests. So the blood tests were not really showing a good, accurate value. That's how we found that out. But that so shocked the toxicology world that that paper has been cited in more than 25 other papers and in an allergy textbook. Now, a doctor by the name of George Yu, Dr. George Yu, who's somewhat out there as being one of the experts on this protocol, he actually tested his own patients, and he found that they had concentrations of PCBs and DDE, which is a metabolite of DDT. They were 1,000 times greater than the blood serum tests revealed. So Dr. George Hughes was part of our extended team for several of the projects that were done over the many years. I don't know if we want to go into all the different projects that were worked on, but he was part of the what was called the Heroes Health Fund as one of the advisors with my father.
Well, here's the important thing I think people need to take home is that a chemical exposure that you had at a given time, and then you moved on from that experience, maybe even forgot about it. Your body has not moved on.
Right.
I had a chemical exposure. The reason I'm so passionate about the environment and about how it relates to public health, is because my own child was born with 7 birth defects and subsequently died as a result of a chemical exposure. Now, I can't prove that, but the geneticist that I worked with post-mortem after my daughter died, in looking at this scenario, the environmental scenario, because there's no clear gene for my daughter's disorder. It's not a genetic condition. So, and I asked him, well, if it's not genetic, then what causes this? And he says, well, multifactorial inheritance. So that means there might be a genetic weakness, but there has to be an environmental thing. And I'm like, well, what is this environmental thing? And I already had that in the back of my mind because we had our house sprayed for fleas. We moved in a new home. And when I came back from, they said, stay away 4 hours. So when I came back, the carpet squished with pesticide. And this is why they offered the guarantee, or 100% guarantee that we'll keep spraying until they're gone. Well, they didn't want to come back. So they made sure. And, literally experiences of headaches, nausea, illness. Finally, I thought, well, maybe it has something to do with the carpet. And I had the carpet cleaned. Well, it was too late. I think I got pregnant maybe in the next month or two. And that early developmental stage of the fetus is when most things go wrong. In that first month, when people don't even know they're pregnant. And I wasn't really trying to get pregnant, so I didn't realize that. And this is what really concerns me for women in East Palestine. I even did a TikTok video trying to warn women, please don't get pregnant. So I'm concerned for women that were already pregnant, but even those women of childbearing age, this is not a time to get pregnant until you have detoxified. And I certainly wouldn't recommend it for a given amount of time, but the thing that I think frustrates me the most is someone who suffered from a chemical exposure myself, is that we cannot trust the regulatory agents. We cannot trust corporations to protect us. We can really not trust the government to protect us from these chemicals because history has shown they are not doing it. We'd like to think that, this isn't the early industrial era when we had Upton Sinclair's book and we had the radon girls, and now, but thousands and thousands of people had to die for those regulations to be put in place and we've seen a pattern of industry hiding the fact that the products and the manufacturing and their workers are all being exposed to toxic levels of chemicals. So just because the company produces something doesn't mean it's safe. Like people think, well, I've approached people, I said, there's some dangerous chemicals in the product you're using. And they'll say, well, if they were dangerous, it wouldn't be sold in the store, Right. And this is not the reality. Or if I'm exposed to it at work, my employer doesn't want me to die, or the most astounding thing to me was that the EPA said the water in East Palestine is safe to drink. So now I'm hearing about this person getting sick. And then recently there's been talk of a lot of dead wildlife along the river, and then my response is already, but it's okay because the EPA said the water is safe to drink. But, I'm stepping out on a limb here, but it's to say that if you look at a lot of these regulatory agents and you look at who's in charge and you step them back in their life a little bit in their career, you find that they used to work for the very companies that they're now being asked to regulate.
Yep, the revolving door condition, exactly. And it's a big problem, and I don't think most people realize that. I mentioned 100,000 chemicals that are in commercial use today, and less than 10% have been tested for human safety. Well, in California, we have Prop 65, and Prop 65 requires manufacturers to put warning labels on their products if they have any, chemicals that are known to cause birth defects, cancers, and other reproductive harm. And right now, we know there's over 900 chemicals on that list. So that should tell you something. In fact, these are known to cause cancer. So, connect the dots. They know that cancer is caused by chemicals. And the best thing that people can do is to detox their bodies so that they have a preventative measure. And I can tell you, we've been so amazed with how many different conditions we've seen reversed on this. And I'll also mention the fact that there's a lot of different conditions that are out there that have no known etiology. So the medical industrial complex doesn't want you to know that they are chemical or heavy metal related or environmental toxin or environmental related. So, these are things like MS, asthma, you've got chronic fatigue syndrome, you've got adrenal fatigue. There's a whole list, fibromyalgia. These are all things that have no known etiology, which should translate in your mind now that they are related to any chemical or heavy metal exposures. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, that everybody does need this protocol, but unfortunately there's conditions that preclude people from being able to do it.
Well, and one of the interesting things for me is someone who primarily deals with clients who have anxiety. So, the protocol I use, obviously completely different from yours, of transformation for anxiety helps 9 out of 10 people who come to see me. So they have magnificent results, even after years of anxiety, panic attacks, depression, things like that. However, it's always bothered me that 10% on the end is not getting the help they needed. And it was interesting because I spoke with Tammy Gutierrez and we talked about this, but I was beginning to pick up on this earlier. Is that when I look at that 10%, and what I will usually do at that point is I will refer them on to functional medicine, not allopathic medicine. I'll say there's something going on physiologically because you are not responding. So it's interesting that I see a pattern of sometimes it's conditions like SIBO, and there's some microbiome problems and some fungal or bacterial overgrowth that shouldn't be there. But I'm noticing now also a frequency of people who are coming back to me because I always check in with them and say, so what did the doctor find out? And there's some toxicity issues. So it was interesting to me talking with Dr. Gutierrez in the interview that, the brain wants to keep us safe. Mm-hmm. The brain wants more than anything that you continue living safely. That's emotional safety and that's physical safety. And so your brain is aware when your toxic burden is getting too high. And then this is why some people have chemical sensitivity because their toxic burden is so high. And then now they get exposed to, the neighbor sitting next to them's perfume. And they have this complete reaction. And the thing I think that's puzzled so many doctors is that this reaction that they're having physically to the chemical is an anxiety-like reaction. They'll often have panic attacks, shortness of breath. And so they get labeled as, you have a mental health problem. That's, hypochondria, all sorts of things. But, it's interesting in talking with functional medicine practitioners that understand that the brain is sending that panic anxiety reaction because the brain is saying no more chemicals. We can't have this anymore. So people don't understand that it's not just physical illnesses that can be caused by these chemical exposures, but it's also psychological problems. And I've seen that with clients. I've seen them, some of them do come and already have existing chemical sensitivity. So I always ask them, are you sensitive to chemicals? It's amazing how many will go, yeah, I get sick every time someone wears cologne around me. And that's the body saying, please stop exposing me in the best way that it knows how to convey that message. And so what kind of conditions from a psychological standpoint are you seeing improve in people post-detoxification?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought up MCS. So multiple chemical sensitivities is one of the things that I have a lot of success with because if you use the analogy that the body is like a vacuum cleaner and it's picking up a lot of dirt and debris and toxins, and the dustbin gets full, and you have to. The vacuum stops working when the dustbin's full, so you have to empty the dustbin in order to get the vacuum to work again properly. So our protocol is like emptying that dustbin. MCS patients, however, are definitely going to need to go through the protocol at least 3 times. In fact, in the old Hubbard days, when we were using strictly the Hubbard method, it would take approximately, or on average, 75 days to put an MCS patient through the program and get them back to where they could tolerate being around any kind of like laundry soaps in the laundry aisle, or any kind of fragrances or perfumes. So 75 days on average is what it took for the Hubbard method, and I had great success with it. But when somebody does our protocol 2 hours a day and does 3 of these 30-day programs, their results are phenomenal. So the important thing to make sure MCS patients understand is it's not in your head. We do know that, and it is a very huge toxic buildup. Your body burden is so great that the only way you're going to get them out is to do a protocol like ours. So if you do have MCS, please reach out to me.
And now, what about mold toxicity? Is mold stored in the fat tissues in the same way, or at least maybe the mycotoxins or byproducts?
Yes, mycotoxins are fat soluble, so yes, they stay in the body. Of course, the best thing to do is get the mold handled. If it's in the house, for example, get that remediated. But the mycotoxins are definitely something that we use, or the protocol is used for, to get the mold out. Also, we've seen people with Lyme disease have great results with our program, and this leads back to something you said earlier about the SIBO and the Candida overgrowths and things like that. So the body is no longer able to regulate these conditions like overgrowths of bacteria or the fungi because of all of the toxicity. Your body's out of balance. So if you do a protocol like ours, you'll find that the body then is able to manage the Candida overgrowths and the SIBO. So the other part of our program that's important to keep in mind is the zeolite that we use on the program is going to help the gut and the microbiota. It's going to improve the microbiome. Other areas of the body that are affected by the zeolite include the villi and the small intestine. So we are able to increase the body's ability to absorb the nutrients from the food you eat. And in fact, zeolite is so the micronized zeolite is so small that it can even filter the blood at the villi. So it's actually chelating any metals and things like that in the blood that's passing through the villi while you have the zeolite.
One of those binders that you were talking about.
That's correct. Yes, micronized zeolite is probably the strongest binder for our protocol, and we use it quite a bit throughout a 30-day program. So the zeolite is used in conjunction with the activated charcoal. We use both of them. However, activated charcoal is known for picking up minerals, so it's not safe to use, like on a 90-day or 6-month type of period. But on our 30-day program, it's perfectly safe to do once a day. But the zeolite is not known for picking up the nutrients like activated charcoal.
So once you go through the recommended amount of protocols, what would be a maintenance that you would do? Let's say for someone who is doing sauna, maybe at least 5 days a week, and then someone maybe who's not able to do that for whatever reason, because maybe they don't have a sauna or they live in a sauna desert. No access to sauna. What would you recommend as far as just staying clean, and then as well make some recommendations for people just to keep as much chemical exposure out of their life to begin with? Obviously, there's the basics like, don't use lotions and powders and creams and sprays that are loaded with chemicals, but I'm sure you can branch out even beyond that. Yeah,
specifically, if you can't pronounce the chemical ingredients, then you know that it's going to be toxic. But I love to recommend organic products. There's no brands I'm going to promote today, but organic products that are chemical free. They aren't used or tested on animals, things like that. And the website that people can check out their products to see if they're toxic is the Environmental Working Group's website. So if you look up the Environmental Working Groups, I think the name of their registry escapes me, but basically you can find out if the products you're using are toxic. And I do not recommend people just throw away all of their the toxic products that they've identified, but slowly replace them as you run out of them. Replace them with something that's non-toxic. The other thing to consider is the food you eat. We don't eat too many, prepackaged, processed, convenience fast foods anymore. The convenience foods are definitely full of toxins. They are not very nutritious, and the organic foods that are non-GMO, that are not overcooked, those are the best things to eat. And I use very little in the way of body products. In fact, my deodorant is a Thai crystal stick, so it's very non-toxic. And I really don't. Everything I use is pretty much non-toxic. I'm not too overboard, by the way, with the non-toxic products. I live an 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time, I am very careful about what I put into or onto my body. But 20% of the time, I live on this planet, so it's okay to do certain things like have a glass of wine with a steak, But be careful about what you do put into or onto your body, and stop, getting yourself more toxic. That's the first thing. I would also recommend people just start taking the zeolite, especially the powdered form. The brand that I do like, and I will bring this brand up, is Heiltropfen. It's a company based in London, but their zeolite is the best that I have found, and I have a good relationship with the CEO who will answer any questions I have. I've been, in communication with them plenty of times over questions that people have about the zeolite. So basically, those are the main things that I recommend people do. But if you do have access to a sauna, at least use it as 3 to 5 times if you can per week, as you mentioned earlier. And I will tell you that the sauna is the healthiest appliance a person can own. And if anybody's interested in sauna, they can reach out to me, because I am a leading expert in sauna. In fact, like I said earlier, I've had a sauna in my life since the 70s. So I know a lot about them. But anyway, the sauna is something that I recommend people do investigate for their own health. And there are 3 portable manufacturers too that I do recommend. I'm not going to mention their names, but there are 3 portable manufacturers that people can buy if there's a budgetary concern or if there's a space concern. So just reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer those questions.
I'm glad you mentioned the Environmental Working Group, because they have an app that's so convenient. I love that website and the app. And the nice thing is you can actually take your products and scan the code, and they will tell you. And so everything's rated from 1 to, I think it's 9. I try to keep, I don't use anything above a 3. That's me. And so I guess I don't follow the 80-20 rule. I try to be 100, but I know I'm not, because there's always, I go out to eat once in a while and do things like that. But it's easier now than ever for people to really be cognizant of what they're putting on their bodies. And the EWG really doesn't focus too much on the foods that we eat or the chemicals that we're ingesting. That's pretty much up to us. But you can be pretty assured if the food is highly processed, it's loaded with chemicals, because those chemicals are necessary to keep it lasting long on the shelf, so that the ho-ho that you're eating could be, 6 months old and you wouldn't even know it. And it'll probably, I had an illustration given to me once at a conference, and this woman took a long table and she spread it with food. And we had gone to lunch and come back from the conference, and here's this table filled with pastry and cookies and all this stuff. And as we're walking in the room, we're going, oh, what a spread. And as we're getting closer and closer, there's this strange kind of not spoiled odor, but a little off. And then we get closer and closer, and you could see stuff looks kind of old, And so it was part of her presentation to tell you that the food on that table was 12 years old.
Oh my gosh.
And it had not decomposed. There was a thing of margarine, there was muffins, cakes, cookies, French fries, all sorts of stuff. None of it had decomposed because of the incredible amount of chemicals that this food was saturated in. And it was a great illustration to the talk that she then gave about, why are we putting this crap in our bodies, basically.
Exactly.
So it's not only what we put on our skin, but what we put in our bodies. And well, we're running out of time, and I just want to thank you so much, Dan, for being on the show today. My mind is blown. I've learned a lot, and I know my listeners have as well. So tell people how they can get in touch with you. If they want to know more, let us know where they can reach you.
Well, thank you for having me, Tiffani. It's been a lot of fun. So my website is getdetoxinated.com. Excuse me, getdetoxinated.com. The book is Sauna Detoxification Using Niacin, Following the Recommended Protocol of Dr. David Root. And basically, if you'd like to schedule an appointment with me, I have a booking system that you can go to called heal.me/detox. So if you'd like to book a complimentary consultation, heal.me/detox. I do have a phone number of 916-366-0999. That number is one you can call, but if you really want to schedule a consult, the heal.me/detox is the best.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan. It has been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of A Transformed Life with Tiffani Cappello. Please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And for more info about the show and your host, Tiffani Cappello, please visit her website, www.tiffanicappello.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.